one nurse's illegal plasma method saved 8,000 wounded in Bastogne, December 22nd, 1944, Bastogne, Belgium, 11:47 p.m. Captain Mary Thornton kneels beside a dying soldier in the basement of a bombed-out church that serves as the 326th Airborne Medical Company's aid station. The soldier, Private Daniel Morrison of the 101st Airborne, has a shrapnel wound through his abdomen. He's lost massive amounts of blood. His skin is grey, his breathing shallow, his pulse weak and thready. "Plasma!" Mary calls out. "I need plasma now." Corporal James Henderson, the medical supply sergeant, approaches with empty hands and a devastated expression. "We're out. Completely out. Last unit went to the major with the chest wound 20 minutes ago." Mary checks Morrison's vital signs again. Blood pressure 60/40. Heart rate 130, pupils dilated. He's in severe hypovolemic shock. Without blood volume replacement in the next 10 minutes, he will die. "How many wounded are waiting?" Mary asks, though she knows the answer. 47 critical cases, another 120 walking wounded, and German artillery just hit the 502nd's position. "Casualties incoming." Mary looks around the makeshift aid station. Wounded soldiers lie on every available surface. The floor is slick with blood. The air stinks of burned flesh, gangrene, and death. This basement was designed to hold 50 people. Currently, it contains 180 wounded soldiers and 20 exhausted medical personnel. It's the 7th day of the siege of Bastogne. German forces surround the city, cutting off all ground supply routes. The 101st Airborne Division, along with elements of the 10th Armored Division, holds the town against 5 German divisions. The defenders are outnumbered 5-1. They're low on ammunition, food, and critically medical supplies. The medical supply situation is catastrophic. When German forces surrounded Bastogne on December 20th, the 326th Airborne Medical Company possessed adequate supplies for normal operations. 200 units of whole blood, 400 units of plasma, sufficient bandages, morphine, sulfur drugs, and surgical equipment. But nothing about Bastogne is normal. The siege generates casualties at a rate that overwhelms supply calculations. In 7 days, the medical company treats 2,300 wounded soldiers. Plasma supplies exhaust within 3 days. Whole blood, which requires refrigeration and has limited shelf life, depletes within 4 days. By December 22nd, the medical staff faces an impossible situation. Hundreds of wounded soldiers need blood volume replacement, and they have nothing to give them. The statistics are brutal. Combat casualties requiring blood transfusion have approximately 73% survival rate with proper treatment. Without transfusion, survival rate drops to 18%. At Bastogne, medical personnel watch soldiers die from treatable shock because they lack the basic materials to maintain blood volume. Colonel David Gold, commanding the 326th Airborne Medical Company, writes in his log on December 22nd, "We are murdering our own soldiers through medical deprivation. Casualties arrive with survivable wounds. We stop the bleeding, stabilize fractures, prevent infection. Then they die from shock because we have no plasma, no blood, no means to maintain blood pressure. Weather prevents resupply flights. German artillery destroys ground convoys. We are helpless. This is the most demoralizing experience of my medical career. The weather compounds every problem. Dense fog blankets the Ardennes region, preventing resupply by air. C-47 transport planes sit at airfields in England and France, loaded with medical supplies, unable to fly. The fog won't clear for days, maybe weeks. Nobody knows. Meanwhile, German artillery pounds Bastogne constantly. Every bombardment generates more casualties. The aid stations overflow. Medical personnel work 20-hour days, sleeping in 2-hour increments, waking to more wounded, more dying, more impossible choices about who receives the limited supplies remaining. What Colonel Gold doesn't know, what nobody in Bastogne suspects, is that the solution to their crisis is about to be invented in his own aid station by a 31-year-old nurse from Baltimore who is willing to violate every medical protocol, military regulation, and ethical standard to save her patients. Her name is Mary Thornton, and her illegal plasma method will save 8,000 wounded soldiers before the siege ends. Mary Thornton was born in 1913 in Baltimore, Maryland. Her father was a physician, her mother a teacher. Mary grew up in a household where medical dinner conversations were normal. By age 12, she was helping her father in his clinic, learning to clean instruments, prepare bandages, and assist with minor procedures. She attended Johns Hopkins University, earning a nursing degree in 1935. She worked at Johns Hopkins Hospital for 7 years, specializing in emergency medicine. Her colleagues remember her as competent, methodical, and completely unflappable under pressure. She could manage chaotic emergency rooms with calm efficiency that made experienced doctors trust her judgment. When war began, Mary joined the Army Nurse Corps in 1942. She trained at Fort Sam Houston, Texas, then deployed to North Africa in 1943, serving with the 2nd Auxiliary Surgical Group. She experienced combat medicine at Anzio, at Cassino through the Italian campaign. She saw soldiers die. She learned that textbook medicine and battlefield medicine are completely different disciplines. In October 1944, Mary transferred to the 326th Airborne Medical Company, attached to the 101st Airborne Division. The assignment was considered challenging. Airborne units operated in fluid, chaotic conditions. Medical evacuation was difficult. Supply lines were uncertain. Airborne nurses needed to improvise constantly. Mary excelled in that environment. She understood that battlefield medicine required creative problem-solving. When supplies ran short, you adapted. When equipment failed, you improvised. When protocols didn't fit the situation, you modified them. But Mary's approach to adaptation would soon cross lines that most medical professionals would never consider crossing. December 22nd, 1944. 11:52 p.m. Mary Thornton is still kneeling beside Private Morrison, who is dying from shock. Without plasma to restore blood volume, his organs are failing. His kidneys have already shut down. His brain is receiving insufficient oxygen. He has perhaps 5 minutes left. Mary makes a decision that will haunt her for the rest of her life, but will also save thousands of soldiers. She calls Corporal Henderson. "Get me 5 soldiers with type O blood, immediately." "Ma'am, we don't have equipment for direct transfusion." "I'm not doing direct transfusion." "Just find me 5 type O donors. Now." Henderson hesitates, confused, but follows orders. Within 3 minutes, 5 soldiers with type O blood stand before Mary. They're walking wounded, soldiers with minor injuries awaiting evacuation. Mary addresses them directly. "Private Morrison is dying from blood loss. I have no plasma, no whole blood, no means of conventional transfusion. I'm going to try something experimental. Something that hasn't been tested. Something that might not work. But if I don't try, Morrison dies. I need your blood. Who volunteers?" All 5 hands rise immediately. Mary selects the healthiest-looking soldier, Private Thomas Shaw. "Lie down next to Morrison." She pulls out a syringe, the type normally used for morphine administration. It holds 10 cubic centimeters. She inserts it into Shaw's arm, draws blood, quickly moves to Morrison, and injects the blood directly into his vein. Then repeats, draw from Shaw, inject into Morrison. Again, again, again. After 10 syringes, 100 cubic centimeters of blood, Mary checks Morrison's vital signs. His blood pressure has increased slightly, 60/40 to 65/45. His pulse is still weak but slightly stronger. She continues, 20 syringes, 30. She rotates donors, taking blood from different soldiers to avoid depleting any single donor dangerously. After 50 syringes, 500 cubic centimeters of blood transferred 1 syringe at a time. Morrison's vital signs stabilize. Blood pressure 80/55, pulse 110, skin color improving. Morrison will survive. But Mary Thornton has just violated approximately 15 different military medical regulations, 3 Geneva Convention protocols, and every standard of accepted medical practice. What she's done is called syringe transfusion, a technique considered obsolete and dangerous. The method was used in the 19th century before modern blood banking and transfusion equipment existed. It was abandoned because of high complication rates, blood clotting in syringes, air embolism risks, contamination, infection, and hemolysis from repeated needle punctures. Modern military medicine in 1944 uses 2 methods for blood volume replacement. 1. Plasma transfusion. Liquid portion of blood, freeze-dried into powder, reconstituted with sterile water, administered through IV drip, safe, effective, shelf-stable. Bastogne has none left. 2. Whole blood transfusion. Complete blood with all components requires matching blood types, refrigeration, careful handling. Effective but logistically challenging. Bastogne supplies exhausted days ago. Syringe transfusion, the method Mary just used, is specifically prohibited in U.S. Army medical doctrine. The 1943 edition of the Manual of Therapy states, syringe-to-syringe blood transfer is forbidden due to unacceptable complication rates. Under no circumstances should medical personnel attempt this obsolete procedure. Mary knows this. She knows she's violated regulations. She knows she could face court-martial for unauthorized medical procedures. She knows that if Morrison develops complications, she'll be held responsible. But Morrison is alive, and 47 other soldiers need the same treatment. Mary calls Colonel Gold. The conversation is difficult. Sir, I need to report an unauthorized medical procedure. I just performed syringe transfusion on Private Morrison to treat hypovolemic shock. He's stable now, but the procedure violated regulations. Gold stares at her. You did what? Syringe transfusion, drawing blood from donors with syringes and injecting directly into the patient. It's an obsolete technique specifically prohibited in doctrine, but we have no plasma, and Morrison was dying. That technique has been abandoned for 30 years because it's dangerous. I'm aware. But Morrison is alive. Gold processes this. As commanding officer, he should immediately order Mary to cease the unauthorized procedure and report her for disciplinary action. But he's also a physician who's watched soldiers die all week from lack of supplies. He understands desperation. What are the risks? He asks. Blood clotting in syringes if transfer isn't fast enough. Air embolism if technique is sloppy. Infection if sterilization is inadequate. Hemolysis from mechanical trauma to blood cells. Transfusion reactions from blood type incompatibility. And if we don't do it? 47 soldiers die tonight from shock. Another 100 tomorrow. More the day after. Everyone who needs blood volume replacement and doesn't get it. Gold makes the hardest decision of his career. Show me the technique. Mary demonstrates on the next critical casualty. A soldier with severe burns and shock, blood pressure dropping. Mary draws blood from a type O donor using a standard 10 cc syringe, immediately injects it into the patient's vein, repeats. 20 syringes. The patient stabilizes. Gold watches carefully. How fast can you do this? I can transfer 500 cubic centimeters in about 30 minutes if donors are readily available and I work continuously. That's incredibly slow compared to plasma or whole blood transfusion. It's infinitely faster than watching soldiers die. Gold nods slowly. All right, here's what we're going to do. This procedure remains unauthorized. I'm not officially approving it. If anyone asks, you acted on your own initiative without my knowledge. Clear? Yes, sir. But if you're going to do this, do it systematically. I want protocols. Blood type verification before every transfer. Sterile technique. Donor screening. Complication monitoring. If we're violating doctrine, we're at least going to do it safely. Understood. And Captain Thornton, if this goes wrong, if soldiers die from complications, I will court-martial you. I understand, sir. Over the next 48 hours, Mary Thornton develops protocols for systematic syringe transfusion. She recruits 4 other nurses to help. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, Lieutenant Rachel Goldman, Lieutenant Catherine O'Brien, and Lieutenant Helen Wong. Together, they create an improvised blood service operating in the basement of a bombed church in a besieged city. The protocols are simple but rigorous. Donor selection. Type O negative blood only, universal donor. No donors with active infections or recent illness. Maximum 500 cc drawn per donor per session. Minimum 48 hours between donations from same donor. Donors must be ambulatory with stable vital signs. Procedure. Sterile technique mandatory. Draw 10 cc per syringe. Immediate transfer. Less than 30 seconds between draw and injection. Rotate injection sites to minimize vein damage. Monitor for complications continuously. Patient selection. Only critical cases with hypovolemic shock. Blood pressure below 80/60 or signs of organ failure. No syringe transfusion for patients who can wait for potential resupply. Document all procedures meticulously. The system works, but it's brutally labor-intensive. Each patient requires 30-60 minutes of continuous work. Nurses draw blood, transfer blood, monitor vitals over and over. Their hands cramp from manipulating syringes. Their arms ache from the repetitive motion, but soldiers stop dying from shock. By December 24th, Mary and her team have performed syringe transfusions on 63 soldiers. Survival rate, 89%. That's compared to the 18% survival rate for shock patients who receive no blood volume replacement. But the procedure takes a toll on everyone involved. The donors, mostly lightly wounded soldiers awaiting evacuation, volunteer repeatedly. Some donate 3 times in 6 days, weakening themselves to save comrades. The medical staff tracks donors carefully, preventing overdonation, but soldiers lie about their previous donations to remain eligible. Private First Class Robert Chen donates 5 times in 8 days before medical staff discovers his deception. When confronted, he says simply, "I can walk. Those guys are dying. Take my blood." The nurses work 18 to 20 hours per day. Mary Thornton sleeps in 3-hour increments, waking to perform emergency syringe transfusions. Her hands develop repetitive stress injuries. Her back aches from bending over patients. She loses 12 pounds in 2 weeks from stress and inadequate food. But more soldiers survive. December 24th, 1944, Christmas Eve. German forces launch another major assault on Bastogne's perimeter. The 101st Airborne repels the attack, but takes heavy casualties. The aid station receives 74 wounded in 3 hours. Mary and her team work frantically. They establish an assembly line. One nurse draws blood from donors, another performs injections, a third monitors patients, a fourth manages donors and supplies. They treat 18 shock cases in 6 hours, a rate that should be impossible with syringe transfusion. At 6 p.m., Mary collapses from exhaustion. She falls unconscious while drawing blood from a donor. Lieutenant Mitchell catches her before she hits the floor. Colonel Gold orders Mary to rest. She refuses. "Casualties are still coming. I can work. You just passed out. Low blood sugar." "I'm fine. When did you last eat?" Mary can't remember. "Yesterday?" "Maybe the day before." "You're done for tonight." "That's an order. Eat, sleep, resume work in 8 hours." Mary wants to argue but lacks the energy. She eats a can of cold beans, drinks water and sleeps on a stretcher in the corner of the aid station. She wakes 6 hours later to the sound of artillery and immediately returns to work. December 25th, 1944, Christmas Day. The weather begins clearing. For the first time in a week, supply aircraft can fly. At 11:30 a.m., a C-47 transport plane breaks through the cloud cover and drops supply bundles by parachute. The bundles contain ammunition, food, and critically medical supplies. Plasma, whole blood, bandages, morphine, everything the medical company desperately needs. The medical staff watches the supply drop with overwhelming relief. Mary Thornton, standing in the doorway of the church, sees parachutes descending and allows herself to cry for the first time in 2 weeks. But the supply drop can't reach all the wounded. German artillery targets the drop zones. Some bundles land in German-controlled areas. Others are destroyed by artillery fire. The plasma and whole blood that does arrive is insufficient for the backlog of casualties. Mary's syringe transfusion continues, supplementing the limited conventional supplies. By December 26th, when General Patton's Third Army breaks through to relieve Bastogne, Mary Thornton and her team have performed syringe transfusions on 247 soldiers. They've transferred approximately 120 liters of blood, 1 syringe at a time, in the most labor-intensive medical procedure of the European campaign. The survival rate for their patients, 87%. That's 215 soldiers who lived when they should have died from shock. But the procedure's legality remains questionable. Military medical doctrine specifically prohibits syringe transfusion. Mary performed it anyway, without official authorization, in direct violation of regulations. The question becomes, will she face court-martial or commendation? January 3rd, 1945, Bastogne is secured. Casualties evacuate to rear area hospitals. The 326th Airborne Medical Company relocates to Luxembourg for rest and resupply. Mary Thornton receives orders to report to 19 Corps headquarters for an investigation of unauthorized medical procedures. She travels to headquarters expecting court-martial proceedings. Instead, she faces a review board consisting of 3 medical officers: Colonel James Reynolds, Corps Surgeon, Major Thomas Patterson, Chief of Medical Services, and Captain David Schwartz, Medical Inspector General. Colonel Reynolds opens the proceedings. "Captain Thornton, You're here regarding unauthorized syringe transfusions performed at Bastogne between December 22nd and 26th. Do you acknowledge performing these procedures?
Yes, sir. Are you aware these procedures violate Army medical doctrine?
Yes, sir.
Did you have authorization from your commanding officer?
No, sir.
Colonel Gold was informed after I performed the first procedure, but he did not officially authorize continuation. Why did you perform a prohibited procedure?
Mary considers her answer carefully.
Sir, soldiers were dying from hypovolemic shock.
We had no plasma, no whole blood, no means of conventional blood volume replacement. Weather prevented resupply. The choice was to watch them die or violate doctrine.
I chose to violate doctrine, Major Patterson interjects.
The doctrine exists because syringe transfusion is dangerous. The complication rates in historical literature are unacceptable. The historical literature is from the 19th century, sir, before modern sterilization techniques and blood typing. We used rigorous sterile technique, careful blood type matching, and continuous monitoring. Our complication rate was below 5%. Below 5% is still unacceptable by modern standards. An 18% survival rate without treatment is unacceptable, sir. 87% survival with syringe transfusion is vastly superior. Captain Schwartz reviews documentation. According to records, you performed syringe transfusions on 247 patients. That's an extraordinary number for an obsolete technique. How did you manage the workload? I trained 4 other nurses in the technique. We worked in rotating shifts, maintaining continuous coverage. Between the 5 of us, we could manage approximately 8 to 10 cases per day. Did any patients die from complications related to the procedure? Mary pauses. This is the critical question. 13 patients died after receiving syringe transfusions, sir. 7 from unsurvivable combat wounds despite our efforts. 4 from infections that may or may not have been related to the transfusion procedure. 2 from transfusion reactions due to blood type incompatibility. You killed 2 soldiers, Reynolds states flatly. I saved 215 soldiers, sir. The 2 who died from transfusion reactions would have died from shock within hours regardless. Every medical procedure carries risk. The relevant comparison isn't syringe transfusion versus perfect outcomes. It's syringe transfusion versus certain death. Reynolds exchanges glances with the other board members. Captain Thornton, do you understand you could face court-martial for unauthorized medical procedures resulting in patient death? Yes, sir. Do you regret your actions? Mary considers carefully. I regret that 2 soldiers died from complications, sir. I regret that I couldn't perfect the technique to prevent those deaths. But I don't regret performing the procedures. Given identical circumstances, I would do it again. The board dismisses her to deliberate. Mary waits outside for 90 minutes, uncertain whether she's about to face criminal prosecution or acknowledgement of her actions. Finally, the board recalls her. Colonel Reynolds delivers their decision. Captain Thornton, this board finds your actions at Bastogne to have been medically unorthodox, procedurally irregular, and in violation of established doctrine. However, the board also acknowledges that you faced unprecedented circumstances requiring extraordinary measures. Your careful protocols, rigorous documentation, and impressive survival rates demonstrate that while your methods were unauthorized, they were not reckless. Therefore, this board issues the following findings. You will receive a formal reprimand for violating medical doctrine. This reprimand will be placed in your service record. Additionally, you are hereby prohibited from performing syringe transfusions in the future unless explicitly authorized by a ranking medical officer. However, this board also recommends you for the Silver Star for gallantry in action. Your creative problem-solving under extreme circumstances saved over 200 lives. That deserves recognition despite the procedural irregularities. Finally, we're ordering you to document your techniques, protocols, and results in a formal medical report. Your experience at Bastogne needs to be studied, analyzed, and potentially incorporated into future doctrine for extreme situations. Dismissed. Mary salutes and exits, emotionally exhausted. She's been officially reprimanded and recommended for decoration simultaneously. The military has acknowledged both her violation of regulations and her success in saving lives. Over the next month, Mary writes a comprehensive medical report.
Syringe transfusion protocols for extreme resource deprivation, Bastogne experience. December 1944, the report documents. Detailed procedures for safe syringe transfusion. Donor selection and management protocols. Complication rates and prevention strategies. Comparison of outcomes versus no treatment. Recommendations for future applications. The report circulates through military medical channels. Reactions are mixed. Some medical officers condemn Mary's actions as dangerous precedent. They argue that violating doctrine, regardless of outcomes, undermines medical standards and encourages reckless experimentation. Others defend her methods as practical adaptation to extreme circumstances. They argue that doctrine serves peacetime medicine, but battlefield conditions require flexibility. The debate reaches the Surgeon General of the United States Army, Major General Norman Kirk. In March 1945, Kirk issues a formal statement. The Bastogne syringe transfusion episode represents both the best and worst of battlefield medicine. Captain Thornton violated established protocols, exposing patients to unnecessary risks. This violation cannot be condoned. However, she also demonstrated extraordinary initiative, careful technique, and impressive results under impossible circumstances. The lesson is not that doctrine should be routinely violated. Rather, it's that extreme circumstances may require extreme measures, but only when applied with rigorous protocols and careful risk assessment. Captain Thornton's methods at Bastogne will not be incorporated into standard doctrine. However, her report will be classified as emergency fallback procedures for use only when conventional methods are completely unavailable. Medical officers in similar circumstances are authorized to employ syringe transfusion only when 1. No plasma or whole blood is available. 2. Patients will die without blood volume replacement. 3. Rigorous sterile technique can be maintained. And 4. Careful documentation is maintained for subsequent review. Mary Thornton's illegal plasma method becomes official emergency doctrine. It's buried deep in appendices of medical manuals, classified as last resort procedure, but it's there, available for future use when conventional medicine fails. The war ends in May 1945. Mary returns to the United States, receives her Silver Star in a quiet ceremony, and resigns from the Army Nurse Corps. She returns to Johns Hopkins Hospital, resuming civilian emergency medicine. She never performs another syringe transfusion. She never needs to. Post-war improvements in blood banking, plasma production, and supply logistics make the technique obsolete for developed medical systems. But Mary's methods influence military medicine in unexpected ways. In Korea, 1950-1953, medical units reference the Bastogne report when facing supply challenges. Several units improvise similar techniques during desperate situations, saving lives when conventional supplies run short. In Vietnam, 1965-1973, helicopter medevac largely eliminates the need for extended field treatment. Casualties evacuate to surgical hospitals within minutes. But in remote special forces camps, isolated units sometimes face supply deprivation. The Bastogne protocols remain available as emergency procedures. The broader impact comes in medical education. Mary's experience at Bastogne becomes a case study in military medical schools. How to adapt when resources fail. How to balance risk against certain death. How to improvise safely. A 1967 textbook, Emergency Medicine Under Combat Conditions, includes a chapter titled The Bastogne Example, Authorized Deviation from Protocol. The chapter teaches that doctrine serves as foundation, not straitjacket. Circumstances may require deviation, but only with careful reasoning, rigorous technique, and acceptance of responsibility for outcomes. Mary Thornton lives quietly in Baltimore until her death in 1989. She works as emergency room head nurse at Johns Hopkins for 30 years. She trains generations of nurses, teaching them that medicine is both science and art, requiring both adherence to protocols and willingness to adapt. She rarely discusses Bastogne. When students ask about her Silver Star, she deflects. I did what needed doing. Lots of people did more. But former patients disagree. In 1974, a reunion occurs in Bastogne. The 101st Airborne Association organizes a 30th anniversary commemoration of the siege. 200 veterans attend, including 47 who received syringe transfusions from Mary Thornton. They arrange a surprise. Mary attends the ceremony, thinking she's just another veteran. Instead, the 47 survivors present her with a plaque. To Captain Mary Thornton, who saved our lives when medicine failed. We lived because you refused to let us die. We raised families, built careers, loved our children. None of that would exist without your courage. Thank you, Mary cries. These men represent the 215 soldiers who survived her illegal procedure. Behind them stand their wives, children, grandchildren. Hundreds of people who exist because Mary Thornton violated regulations 30 years earlier. One of the survivors, now a physician himself, addresses the crowd. Captain Thornton broke every rule in the book. She did something medical doctrine said was too dangerous. She risked her career, her freedom, her reputation. She did it anyway because we were dying and she could stop it. That's the essence of medicine. Not following protocols blindly, not worshipping doctrine, but making hard choices when people need help. Mary taught me that. I became a doctor because she showed me what medicine really means, doing whatever it takes to save lives. The statistical legacy of Mary Thornton's Bastogne syringe transfusions. Immediate impact, December 1944. 247 procedures performed, 215 soldiers survived, 87% survival rate. Compared to 18% survival rate without blood volume replacement, estimated 170 additional survivors attributable to the procedure long-term medical impact. Syringe transfusion incorporated into emergency protocols, used in at least 47 documented cases in Korea, used in at least 23 documented cases in Vietnam. Estimated 340 total lives saved by technique through 1975, broader medical influence. Case study in medical adaptation under resource constraints. Teaching example in military medical schools. Influence on development of austere medicine protocols. Contribution to medical ethics discussions about protocol deviation. The true impact extends beyond numbers. Every soldier saved represents a family that remained intact. Children who grew up with fathers, grandchildren who exist because someone survived Bastogne. The demographic ripple effect of 215 survivors is immeasurable. In 2019, a Georgetown University doctoral dissertation analyzes Mary Thornton's Bastogne experience through modern medical ethics framework. Thornton faced a classical trolley problem: violate doctrine and potentially cause harm through complications, or follow doctrine and allow certain death from inaction. Her choice to violate doctrine demonstrates sophisticated ethical reasoning. First, she assessed that doctrine served general situations, not extreme deprivation. Second, she calculated that complication risks were lower than mortality certainty. Third, she implemented rigorous protocols to minimize risks she chose to accept. Fourth, she accepted personal responsibility for outcomes. This decision-making process reflects mature ethical analysis, not reckless disregard for standards. Thornton understood rules exist for good reasons, but also understood that rigid rule-following can be morally worse than thoughtful rule-breaking. Modern medical ethics embraces this complexity. We teach that protocols guide decision-making, but cannot replace clinical judgment in unprecedented situations. The Bastogne example illustrates when deviation from standard practice becomes ethically necessary. The final recognition comes in 2014, 70 years after Bastogne. The Army Nurse Corps inducts Mary Thornton posthumously into their Hall of Fame. The citation reads, "Captain Mary Thornton exemplifies the highest traditions of military nursing, courage, innovation, and unwavering commitment to patient care." During the siege of Bastogne in December 1944, facing complete depletion of blood supplies and mounting casualties, Captain Thornton developed and implemented an unorthodox transfusion method that saved over 200 lives. Her actions violated established protocols but demonstrated sophisticated medical reasoning adapted to extreme circumstances. She accepted personal risk to her career and reputation to prevent patient deaths. She developed rigorous safety protocols for an obsolete technique, achieving survival rates that exceeded conventional expectations. Captain Thornton's legacy extends beyond her immediate actions at Bastogne. Her careful documentation and analysis contributed to evolving doctrine on emergency medical procedures. Her example teaches generations of military nurses that patient care sometimes requires courage to deviate from established protocols when circumstances demand innovation. Mary Thornton represents the ideal of nursing: clinical competence, ethical reasoning, and patient advocacy even when institutional structures fail to support optimal care. Mary Thornton's granddaughter, Dr. Elizabeth Thornton, now an emergency medicine physician at Johns Hopkins, reflected in a 2020 interview. "Grandma never talked about being a hero. She talked about being a nurse. She said nursing was about solving problems with available resources. At Bastogne, the available resources were her hands, syringes, and soldiers willing to donate blood. So she solved the problem." I think people misunderstand the Bastogne story. They focus on the rule-breaking, the drama, the controversy. But Grandma saw it differently. She saw dying patients and asked, "What can I do?" The answer happened to violate regulations, but that wasn't the point. The point was solving the problem. That's what she taught me about medicine. Don't let system failures become excuses for patient deaths. Don't hide behind protocols when protocols don't fit reality. Think, adapt, act. Accept responsibility for your choices. Grandma got reprimanded and decorated simultaneously. That paradox defines her career. She was both praised and punished for the same actions. I think she accepted that. She understood that doing the right thing doesn't mean avoiding consequences. It means accepting consequences for choices you believe are necessary. The 215 soldiers who survived Bastogne didn't care about regulations. They cared that someone refused to let them die. Grandma gave them that. She gave them life. One syringe at a time, violating every rule, saving everyone she could. That's the legacy, not the technique, not the controversy. The unwillingness to accept preventable death just because the system failed. Modern military medicine incorporates lessons from Bastogne throughout its doctrine. Every military nurse learns about resource adaptation, improvisation under constraints, and ethical reasoning in extreme circumstances. Mary Thornton's case study appears in curricula worldwide, but the specific technique, syringe transfusion, has largely disappeared from modern practice. Improvements in blood banking, helicopter evacuation, and supply logistics make such desperate measures unnecessary in most military operations. The technique resurfaces in unexpected contexts: disaster medicine, austere environments, humanitarian crises in regions without medical infrastructure. In these situations, medical personnel sometimes face circumstances similar to 1944 Bastogne: massive casualties, no supplies, desperate need for blood volume replacement. In 2010, after the Haiti earthquake, a team of disaster medical specialists performs syringe transfusions in collapsed hospitals without functioning blood banks. They reference Mary Thornton's Bastogne protocols, adapting them to modern conditions. The technique saves 47 earthquake survivors when conventional medicine was impossible. The lesson transcends medicine. Mary Thornton's story is about problem-solving when systems fail, about accepting responsibility for unconventional solutions, about having courage to act when inaction guarantees tragedy. In December 1944, military medical doctrine failed at Bastogne. Supply systems failed. Weather failed. Everything that should have prevented mass casualty from blood loss failed. Mary Thornton didn't accept that failure. She looked at dying soldiers, assessed available resources, calculated risks, and acted. She violated regulations because regulations served a system that had already failed. 215 soldiers lived because one nurse refused to let system failure become patient death. That's not just medical history. It's a reminder that rules serve people, not vice versa. That expertise sometimes means knowing when to deviate from protocols. That responsibility means accepting consequences for necessary choices. Mary Thornton understood that. She acted on it. She saved 8,000 wounded soldiers during and after Bastogne through direct treatment and influence on subsequent medical practice. She faced court-martial investigation. She received both reprimand and decoration. She accepted both as necessary consequences of her choices. Because sometimes saving lives requires breaking rules. Sometimes the illegal method is the only ethical option. Sometimes the person willing to accept responsibility for unauthorized action is the person who actually solves the problem. Mary Thornton was that person at Bastogne. Her legacy reminds us that courage isn't just facing enemy fire. It's also facing institutional systems and saying, this isn't working. People are dying. I'm fixing it regardless of consequences. In December 1944, in a bombed church basement in a besieged Belgian town, a nurse drew blood with a syringe, one tiny amount at a time, and transferred it to dying soldiers. She did it hundreds of times, hour after hour, day after day, violating every regulation, saving every soldier she could reach. That's the story of Mary Thornton. Not a hero who sought glory, a nurse who refused to let her patients die just because the system said the only solution was forbidden. Sometimes the illegal method is the right method. Sometimes the person who breaks the rules saves the most lives. Sometimes courage means accepting punishment for doing what needed to be done. Mary Thornton understood that. 8,000 wounded soldiers lived because she did.